Montana Territory, 1878. The stagecoach wheel shattered just as the sun dipped behind the jagged spines of Thorny Gulch, and the young bride inside was thrown clean into the dust. Cecily Norwood hit the dirt hard, her bonnet flung from her head and her wedding dress torn at the hip. She scrambled to her feet, coughing on the dry earth, her heart thumping like a drum. The other passengers cried out as the coach tipped sideways, one wheel split from the axle entirely. The driver cursed, already pulling the reins to steady the horses. "Bandits!" someone shouted. Cecily spun just as three riders came hard over the ridge, rifles drawn, faces masked with cloth. One fired into the air, a warning shot. The driver bolted for cover. The stage's guards were already down, groaning in the brush. She backed up without thinking, her heel catching in the brittle scrub. She went down again, hands scraping rock. Her chest heaved as the riders came fast, hooves pounding, pistols raised. Then a sharp crack split the air. One of the bandits jerked backward in the saddle and toppled off his horse, dust kicking up around him. Another shot rang out, echoing off the gulch walls. The second rider's hat flew from his head, and he wheeled his mount around fast, hollering something Cecily could not make out. The third bandit turned just in time to catch a bullet in the leg. He screamed and dropped his gun. A lone figure rode in from the west, rifle still raised. His duster flared behind him, dark against the setting sun. His horse moved quick and sure, like it had done this 100 times. He was tall even in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw, and eyes like a storm rolling in. His rifle never wavered. The last bandit limped after his friends, scrambling on foot. The cowboy let him go. Cecily blinked against the dust. Her palms stung, her heart still racing. The man dismounted, stepping over the broken brush like he was born in it. He stopped a few feet from her, lowering his rifle. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just shaken, I suppose." He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong, but careful. He helped her up gently, as if he knew she was still trying to catch her breath. "Name's Knox Valen," he said. "You with that coach?" Cecily nodded. "Yes. I was on my way to meet my fiancée in Red Rock. Or I was." Knox glanced at the coach, then back at her. "Well, that coach is going nowhere tonight. Wheels done for." The driver confirmed it a moment later, swearing under his breath. "We will have to wait for help. Could be days." Cecily looked down at her torn dress, the dirt on her hands. "I have waited long enough," she whispered. Knox tilted his head. "You running from something?" "I am running towards something," she said. "Or I was. I left everything I knew to marry a man I have never met." He nodded slowly. "That is a hard thing." Cecily met his eyes. "And now I have landed in a place called Thorny Gulch. It feels like a bad omen." Knox smiled just a little. "It is not so bad, once you get used to the thorns." He led her away from the wreck, guiding her around sharp brush and scattered rocks until they reached a small clearing beneath a rock shelf. There he built a fire with practiced ease and handed her a canteen. "Drink," he said. "You took a fall." Cecily drank, then sat, curling her legs beneath her skirt. The heat of the fire warmed her face. She watched him in the flickering light. He was quiet, calm, as if danger meant nothing to him. But there was a kindness in the way he moved, always careful not to startle her. "Why were you out here?" she asked. "Passing through," he said. "Had business in White Hill. Saw the smoke, heard the shots." "And came anyway?" He looked up, his eyes catching hers. "Could not leave folk to be robbed." Something in her chest eased at that. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. He nodded. They sat together in the dark, the fire crackling low. The night air grew cold. Knox shrugged off his duster and offered it to her. She hesitated, then slipped her arms into it. It smelled like leather and pine and something warm she could not name. "You always ride alone?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. "Easier that way." She studied his face. "Does not get lonely?" He glanced at her. "Sometimes." She looked down. "I was supposed to marry a man named Walter. We wrote letters. He seemed kind. But now, after all this, I do not know if I even want to go through with it." Knox poked the fire. "You do not owe anyone anything just because it was planned." "I was trying to make a life," she said. He looked at her, voice steady. "You still can." They were quiet a long time. The fire burned low. The wind picked up, stirring her hair. She pulled the coat tighter around her and watched him as he leaned back on one elbow, his face calm, but alert. There was something about the way he listened without rushing her that made her feel steadier. "Thank you." she said again. He looked over. I am glad I was passing through. She smiled, a real one this time. So am I. The stars were bright above Thorny Gulch, and in the quiet between them, something gentle started to grow. The dawn brought a cold wind that stirred the ashes of their fire and painted the rocks in pale gold. Cecily sat wrapped in Knox's coat, her dress stiff with dust and blood at the hem where a thorn bush had scored her the night before. She'd slept little, her back sore from the hard ground, but her eyes were clear and her thoughts sharper than they had been in weeks. Knox was already up, crouched by a patch of sagebrush, his rifle slung across his back. He was quiet in his movements, watching the horizon with the stillness of someone who'd spent years doing just that. When he noticed her awake, he stood and poured water from a battered tin into a small pot, setting it over the rekindled flame. There's a trail about 2 miles south, he said. Leads to a ranch with a stable. If I ride fast, I can bring back a wagon by sundown. Will they lend you one? Cecily asked, gathering her hair and tying it back with a piece of ribbon torn from her petticoat. They owe me a favor, Knox said simply. She studied his face, the way the morning light caught the edges of his jaw. You've been around here a while, haven't you? He nodded. Worked cattle for the ridges up near Bitter Creek, then drifted down when the herds moved lower. Folks here remember who helps and who doesn't. Cecily drew her knees up, resting her chin on them. I never imagined it like this. I thought Montana would be green, gentle. Knox gave a short laugh, not unkind. There's green if you go north enough. But this part? It teaches you how to stand up on your own 2 feet. I've always had someone telling me where to place mine, she admitted. First my father, then my sister. Even Walter, in his letters he made it sound like he'd already planned the whole of our life together. Maybe he thought that was comfort, Knox said, breaking a biscuit in half and offering her the larger piece. Some men do. Cecily took it, chewing in silence for a moment. I think I wanted to be someone new, not just Miss Norwood of St. Louis, but whatever brave woman I imagined I'd become. She didn't show up yesterday. She's here now, Knox said. Cecily looked at him. You don't know me. I saw you get up alone, with your hands bleeding, and not cry once. I've known men who folded quicker. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but something steadier. And what about you? You ride in like some storybook hero, save us all, and vanish again. I'm no hero, Knox said, brushing dirt from his cuffs. I've done things I don't talk about. I just don't like seeing good people come to harm. Do you always know who's good? No, he said. But I trust my gut. And my gut says you didn't deserve what happened yesterday. Cecily's fingers tightened around the dry biscuit. Neither did the others. That guard, he had a little sketch of his boy in his coat pocket. I saw it when they carried him to the shade. Knox's jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. After a pause, she said, What will you do after the wagon comes? Help you get to Red Rock, if that's still where you want to go. And if it's not? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stirred the pot once, then set the spoon aside. Then that's a choice you'll have to make. But you won't have to make it alone. Cecily looked down at her hands, the scrapes already scabbed over. She'd never thought a stranger's presence could feel like a tether in a world come loose, but here he was, steady as the ground beneath her feet. I'm not afraid of Walter, she said finally. I didn't think you were. I just don't know if going to him is the same thing as going forward. Knox let that settle between them as the pot steamed. Ain't many folks brave enough to admit that. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, where the land stretched out in folds of ochre and dry gold, the occasional cottonwood breaking the lines like punctuation. There was a stillness to it that seemed to want something from her, a decision, maybe. A vow. I'll help you break camp, she said, standing. You'll need a head start if you want to make it to that ranch and back before dusk. Knox nodded once, then handed her a saddlebag. Pack what you need. I'll be faster alone. She watched him step into the stirrup and swing up into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath him, eager. As he turned the animal south, he looked back over his shoulder. There's a creek past that ridge, he said. Water's clean. Stay close to the rocks, out of the sun. I'll be back before the stars. Then he was gone, hoofbeats fading into the open country. Cecily stood alone, the coat still around her shoulders, the morning wind threading through the quiet. She turned toward the ridge, her stride careful but sure, and began walking. The creek lay quiet beneath the ridge, its banks shaded by cottonwoods whose leaves whispered with the wind. Cecily knelt by the water, rinsing her scraped hands, watching the blood swirl away into the current. The coat lay folded beside her, heavy with his scent and the dust of the trail. A bird called sharp from the far bank. She looked up, scanning the brush. Nothing moved but the wind. She stayed close to the rock face, as Knox had said, gathering dry twigs and pressing them into a small pile near the ashes of the earlier fire. The sun crept higher, edging warmth into the stone. She kept busy straightening the saddlebag, brushing dirt from her skirt, fixing the torn hem with a bit of thread she'd found in her sewing roll. Her fingers worked steadily, but her thoughts drifted. The letters from Walter had never once asked what she wanted. They'd been full of plans, fences to mend, neighbors to meet, a church that needed a new bell. She'd read them by candlelight, nodding along, telling herself this was what grown women did. They agreed to futures like contracts. A branch cracked somewhere behind her. She stiffened, hand on the ground. "Easy," came a low voice. She turned slowly. A woman stood just beyond the trees, rifle lowered but not slack. Her dress was patched but clean, boots scuffed, hair braided tight beneath a slouch hat. She couldn't have been past 30, but her eyes were tired in a way Cecily recognized. "You ain't local," the woman said. "No," Cecily said. "I'm from Missouri." The woman stepped closer, studying her. Saw the smoke from the ridge. Thought maybe it was another fire. Something happened. There was a robbery. A man named Knox stopped them. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Knox Valen." Cecily nodded. The woman lowered her rifle completely. "He saved my brother's life 3 winters ago. Pulled him out of a snow pit, near starved. Folks around Bitter Creek owe him more than they say out loud." Cecily rose. "He went to fetch a wagon." "Good," the woman said. "Name's Hattie. I live up the ridge." "You need something?" Cecily hesitated, then said, "I think I need a clearer head." Hattie gave a short nod. "Come on, then." They walked slowly, the trail narrow and snaking through brush thick with burrs. Hattie led her to a cabin half hidden by a stand of juniper. The porch sagged at one end, but the roof was sound. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and soap. Hattie set a kettle on the stove. "He never stays long," she said. "Knox. Always passing through. But he does what he says." "I believe that," Cecily said. "You care for him?" Cecily turned from the window. "I don't know. We only just met." Hattie poured water into 2 chipped mugs. "Don't take long sometimes. When the right person shows up, it's like a door swings open you didn't know was there." Cecily took the mug. The tea was bitter and warming. "I thought I had everything figured out." "I did too," once Hattie said. "Then the man I married drank himself into the ground and left me with a patch of land and no money. I was 21. I'm 23, Cecily said. "Well," Hattie said, "you've still got time to ask yourself what kind of life you want to live, and with what kind of man." Cecily stood in the doorway an hour later, watching the road. The wind had shifted, bringing the smell of sage and dust. She didn't say much as she thanked Hattie and made her way back down the trail. The sun hung lower now, shadows lengthening. She reached the camp just as the first sound of wheels broke through the hush. Knox crested the ridge with a 2-mule rig, the wagon empty but for a folded canvas and a coil of rope. He pulled up, studying her face. "You all right?" "I met someone," she said. "A woman named Hattie. She said you pulled her brother from a snow pit." He dismounted, tying the reins. "That was years ago. She speaks highly of you." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," Cecily said. "That's why it matters." They stood together in the shadow of the ridge, the wagon behind them, the silence stretching wide but not heavy. "I won't be going to Red Rock," she said. Knox didn't blink. "All right. I don't know what comes next," she added. "I do," he said. "We'll ride west. There's a town near the Bitterroot River. Plenty of work. Decent people." She nodded once. "And after that?" "That depends," he said, "on what you want." She looked up at him, the sky behind him deepening to rose. "I want to build something that's ours." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Then we'll start with the road ahead." He helped her into the wagon, his hand steady at her elbow. The mule stepped into motion as he took the reins, the sound of wheels and hooves rolling into the quiet like a promise. Behind them, Thorny Gulch faded into the dusk. Ahead, the land opened. They reached the Bitterroot Valley by the 3rd morning, the wagon creaking low with supplies they'd bartered along the way: flour, a bolt of rough cotton, a hand-forged spade. The land here swelled with green, the river cutting a clean path through the basin like a vein of silver. Snow still clung to the far-off peaks, but spring had taken root below. Knox guided the mules off the main trail onto a split road that wound between dogwood thickets and the first blooming flax. They passed a weathered sign that read Clifton Fork, its paint mostly gone. "There's a homestead we can claim up here," he said. "Old cattle station, long since given up. Roof's half caved, but there's a well and enough land to work." Cecily, seated beside him, adjusted the brim of the straw hat she'd traded for in Elk Glen. Who held it last? A man named Greaves. Lost 3 sons to the snows and left the valley. No claim renewals in over a year. She ran a hand along the edge of the wagon seat, her nails clean now but short, torn at the corners. "And you think we could make it livable?" Knox glanced at her, his jaw set against the morning wind. "I do." They reached the clearing near midday. The building stood half-sunken into the slope, its back wall leaning like it had grown tired of standing. A rusted iron stove poked from the collapsed corner. The well was there, ringed by dry grass, and beyond it the earth opened wide into field and timber. Cecily stepped down from the wagon. "We'll need a new roof. And the door's gone." "I'll cut pine from the ridge," Knox said. "There's a sawmill 5 miles east. I'll ride out in the morning." She walked slowly toward the structure, pushing open what remained of the frame. Birds scattered from the rafters. Dust curled in the air as sunlight broke through the gaps above. "We'll need lime for the walls," she said, "and something to patch the floor." "I'll fetch what's needed," he said. She turned to him then, her face unreadable. "And what do I do? While you ride and chop and trade?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "You make it a home." Her breath caught, just slightly. "That's not a small thing to ask." "I know it," he said, "but I'm not asking it of a small-hearted woman." She looked down at her boots, then out across the field. "I never thought I'd find myself in a place like this. Not with him, not with anyone." "You're not with just anyone," he said. They didn't touch, not yet, but the silence between them held a weight neither pulled away from. That night, they set up bedrolls by the wagon. Cecily lit a small lantern and placed it between them, the flame flickering against the canvas. "Did you ever think of marrying?" she asked, her voice barely above the crickets. Knox lay back, one arm behind his head. "Not in any real way. I figured I'd keep moving too long for anyone to wait. And now," he turned his head toward her, "now I'm here." She let that rest between them, then said, "I don't want to be someone following behind a man. I want to build something with one." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Then we'll build it side by side." She lay back then, pulling the blanket over her to the chin. The stars above were thick as seeds scattered by hand. The air smelled of dust and pine and beginning. In the space between them, the lantern's light flickered once, then steadied. The first weeks passed in a rhythm that shaped itself around the land. Knox rose before the sun to split timber, the sound of his axe echoing through the valley while dew still hung in the grass. Cecily kept to the shade of the cabin shell, clearing rubble from the floor and scrubbing every board that could be salvaged. They spoke little during those hours, but at dusk, when the tools were set aside, they sat together on the slope above the well, watching the last light catch the river's edge. She noticed how he never rushed her. When she paused to stare at the half-finished doorframe or stood at the edge of the field with her hands on her hips, he waited. He didn't offer reassurances or try to fix the weight in her shoulders. He just stood beside her, steady, as if that was answer enough. One afternoon, as she hauled a bucket of water from the well, her grip slipped. The bucket fell hard, splashing her skirt. She hissed, dropping to her knees to gather what she could. "You all right?" Knox called from where he was loading planks near the wagon. "I'm tired of being half useful," she said. "I know how to thread a needle and set a table, but none of that builds a roof." He walked over and crouched beside her. "You want to learn?" She looked at him, water dripping from her sleeves. "I want to stop feeling like I have to ask." "You don't. You live here same as me." So he showed her how to hold the saw so the blade pulled clean, how to brace a board with one foot while hammering with the other. She blistered, swore once under her breath when she hit the same knuckle twice, but by the week's end, she could hang a shutter straight and drive a nail without splitting the wood. By midsummer, the cabin had walls that kept out wind and a roof that held against the first brief rain. Cecily pressed her cheek to the cool clay of the finished hearth and laughed. "I didn't think it would feel like this," she said. "Like something in me finally settled." Knox leaned against the doorframe, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You built it. That feeling's earned." Later, she laid a cloth across the new table and set out 2 plates, one cracked, the other whole, both scrubbed until the glaze shone faintly in the lantern light. She ladled stew into each and sat down across from him. "I've been thinking," she said, folding her hands. About what makes a life feel real. He waited, his spoon paused in midair. It's not what you begin with, she said. It's who you begin it with. He set the spoon down. Are you saying you've decided? I already did, she said. The day you offered me your coat before you asked my name. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Then I'll ask it now. Not because I need to, but because it's right. Will you stay here with me, Cecily? Not just through the work, but through the years. She didn't hesitate. Yes, Knox. I already have. They married by the river under aspens just beginning to yellow. Knox wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff with starch, and Cecily walked barefoot through the grass, her dress made from the bolt of cotton they'd saved for months. Hattie came down from the ridge and served as witness, her smile small but warm. Afterward, Cecily rested her head against Knox's shoulder as they sat on the cabin step. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke, and the crickets had started their low song. What would your father have said? Knox asked, brushing her temple with his thumb. He'd have looked at your boots, made a noise in his throat, then nodded once, she said. Which, in his way, meant everything. Knox chuckled. Then I'll take that. She turned to face him fully. You never told me your mother's name. May, he said. She raised 4 boys and buried 2. Had hands like cured leather and a voice that made men pause at the table. She'd have liked this place, Cecily said. She'd have liked you more. They sat in silence until the stars came out. The wind moved through the tall grass, and the cabin behind them stood whole under the night sky. Years passed. The fields grew with barley and squash, and the apple tree they planted by the well bore fruit by the 3rd autumn. Cecily taught 2 neighboring children their letters, and Knox took work helping settle fence disputes up and down the valley, his word respected without need for raised voices. They never left Clifton Fork. They didn't need to. When winter came, they stacked wood and dried beans and sat close by the hearth. When spring returned, they walked the land hand in hand, not talking much, never needing to. Their love was quiet and built slow, shaped by the same hands that mended roofs and tilled soil. It didn't need grand words. It lived in the way he brushed straw from her hair each morning, and the way she always left the lantern burning until he came home from town. They grew older, but not apart. The house they built stayed warm, the walls bearing their laughter, their grief, their joy. And in that valley below the Bitterroot, where the river bent gently around their land, they lived the rest of their days side by side. Nothing left unfinished. Everything exactly as it should be.